welcome to this email validation tutorial in which we're going to be using Create React App and the Mailboxlayer API to validate a user's email address as part of a web sign-up flow. We won't actually be signing the user up for anything. We're just going to be validating the email address as the first step to make sure their data is good before we send it to our database. So let's go ahead and get started with Create React App. And if you have NPM at 5.2 or higher on your computer and Node at version 14 or above, you can just run npx create react app and then give it an app name, and it will install and download all the dependencies you need and spin up the app for you right there. You don't have to configure Webpack or Babel. It sets up the file structure for you. It's a pretty awesome little framework for React. So while that's going, let's go ahead and take a look at the API. So this is the Mailboxlayer API. It's an API specifically for validating and verifying email addresses. You can sign up for a free plan very easily. Just go to their website and click sign up for free. Input your name, your email address, a couple of more pieces of information, and then let them know that you're not a robot, and click create account. This is going to bring you to your dashboard where you'll see your API access key. I've blocked it out here for security, obviously. You're also going to see a validate email address testing sandbox where you can put in an email address, let it know if you want it to run an SMTP check and to format the JSON, and then click run, and it'll dump all that information out into the browser for you. So if we take a look at the documentation here, you're going to see a little bit more info about your access key, and then you're going to see information about the API response. So let's have a look at this. This did you mean field right here is very useful. If the user inputs a typo into their email address, it will make suggestions of what it could have been. Then obviously it'll return the user and the domain. It'll tell you a Boolean as to whether the format of the email is valid. It'll give you information about the MX records and SMTP check, and there's links here to check more about what that means if you're not familiar with that. There's all these fields for catch-all, role, and disposable emails that help you kind of filter out a lot of spam. And then at the bottom here, it returns a quality score between 0 and 1, basically telling you how deliverable the email address is. So it looks like Create React App has finished installing here, so we can go ahead and cd into the folder that it's created for us and run npm start, and that is going to just spin the app right up in our browser at localhost 3000. And as you can see, they provide some boilerplate here for us. We're actually gonna just go and delete that boilerplate right off the bat because we're gonna be building our app directly in this file. So if we save the file here and then go back, now you can see we've got this nice blank slate to work with. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is mock out an environment file, and this is not a real .env file. This is just for the purposes of this tutorial to get into the best practices of keeping your sensitive keys and that kind of information in a separate file. So you're going to create variables for your access key and the API URL, and you're going to export them from this file into that app.js file. So as you can see here, coming back into this file, I've imported those values from my environment. I've also imported the useEffect hook from React. And then I've hard-coded a test email address that we're going to use just to get up and running here to run requests against the API. As you can see, I'm using this useEffect hook here to call a verify email function, which I'm going to write right now. This verify email function is going to call our API. It's going to query the API using the React fetch global. It's going to pass it our hard-coded email for now and our access key. And then when we get that response back, all we're going to do is log it to the console. So let's take a look at what that looks like. If we reload the app here in the browser, you can see that we're getting back all of that data that the validation API sends us. And you can see that this email is not disposable, it is valid, it is not free, it is a role-based email, which you may want to consider role-based emails invalid. For the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to consider that valid. The SMP check was fine and everything here looks good. So this is a valid email address. Now we basically want to use all of that data that the API returned to us to decide if we think this email address is valid. So we're going to create a file called services.js where we can write a helper function that goes through that data and then returns a Boolean based on all of those values. So let's call the function validate email data, and we're going to pass it all of that data, all of those fields that come right off of that object that the API returns to us. We're using destructuring here to just pull those fields right out. Let's delete role because we're not actually going to check for that. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're going to look at those values and we're going to decide based on these values, overall, is the email address valid? So let's say that as long as it's not a catch-all and as long as it's not disposable, we're going to say that and also that the format of the email is valid. We're going to say that means that those aspects of the email make it valid. We're then going to look at the SMTP check and the MX records, and we're going to say, okay, as long as both of those are good, we're also considering this email valid. And then finally, we'll look at the quality score and we'll determine, okay, if it meets a certain threshold, we'll consider that high quality and we'll consider that valid. So then we're just going to return all of those Booleans double-landed together, essentially, to give us one big Boolean of all of the values of this email address. So as long as this is valid, and this is valid, and this is valid, we're considering this email valid. So now we want to use that function in our app.js file. So let's go ahead and import it from services. And then down here where we were console logging the data, now we're going to use that function to determine if the email is valid. The API hasn't actually validated the email. It's given us a lot of information about different aspects of the email and how valid those are. So we're going to decide based on that whether we think it's valid. And what we're going to do once we've decided that is we're going to set that value into state. So we're going to create a value in state called isValid, and we're going to initialize it as false. And then basically, once we've done running that function on the email data that we get back from the API, we're going to set it into the state so that we can use that later to display a message to our user. Now, right now, all we're doing is validating this hard-coded email address, which isn't actually all that useful. We really want to be able to validate an email that the user inputs, right? The user's trying to sign up for our service. They want to input their email address, and then we want to make sure that that email is valid before we let them do anything else in our app or anything else with our sign-up flow. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to need to capture their email address in state. And then instead of passing the hard-coded email address that we're currently passing here, we're going to use the email from state, the user email from state. So in order to capture that address, we need an input. We're going to add also an H1 and an H2 here just to kind of welcome the user to our sign-up flow. And then we're just going to have a basic text input, a holder to show the user what they should be doing. We're going to use the user email as the value, and we'll set that into state later. And then the onChange handler here is going to capture the value from this input, and it's going to set that value into state. So let's go ahead and add our user email value into state and our set user email function, and we'll initialize it as an empty string. So now you can see we've got our lovely welcome message here and our nicely styled input, and the user can add their email address here, and not much else really happens, right? Because we haven't given the user any kind of sign up button. So we want to put a sign up button down here that once the user is done inputting their email address, they click that button. The first thing that happens is we call the validation API. We pass it the email address the user gave us. The API sends us back our data. We decide if the email is valid, and then based on that, we show the message to the user, and then we let them either continue with sign up or not. So let's go ahead and add that button. We're going to put it right underneath the input, and we are going to give it a click handler that calls our verify email function. We're going to call it sign up so the user knows exactly what we're doing. And then because we're calling that verify email function now when the user clicks the button, we don't need that use effect hook anymore. And instead of passing that hard-coded email, we're now passing the input that the user gave us that we've set into state. So we can delete that, and then we can also delete this use effect import here as well. Now, returning to our UI, we have a beautiful button here, and when the user inputs an email address here, and then goes ahead and clicks this button, still nothing is happening. Why is that? Well, it's because we aren't actually rendering anything in state about the status of that email. So we've sent the request, we've gotten our data back, we've validated it, we've decided if we think it's a valid email, but right now we're not actually doing anything with that is valid value. So we need to render a message for our user telling them whether their email was valid or not. And then also what we would do is, based on the result of that is valid call, we would either send the user along in the sign up flow, or we would stop them right there. So for now, we're just gonna display a message to the user because sending them along a sign up route is a little beyond the scope of this tutorial. So we'll just tell them whether sign up was successful if the email was valid, or we'll tell them, sorry, your email was invalid, please, can you try again or give us another one? And we're going to render either one of those messages based on the result of that call. We're also going to add a little styling here just to make it extra clear for the users. So we will give this H3 a class name, and what we're going to do is we're going to give it a conditional class name also based on the result of that is valid call. And I've called this the wrong thing here. Hold on one second. There we go. So if it is valid, we're going to make it one color, and if it is not valid, we're going to make it another color. So let's look at CSS and make those classes. If it's valid, let's go ahead and make it a nice bright green. And if the email is invalid, we will go ahead and make it a like a nice red color. Pale violet red, that's a good one. Cool. So going back to app.js, now if it's valid, we see this nice green, good job, sign up successful. If it's not, we'll see a red email invalid error message. There's still actually a little more we can do here because right now this H3 is rendering no matter what happens right off the bat. So the user's going to see this weird sign up successful or email invalid message no matter what the app is doing. So we actually only want to show them this if they have clicked that button and validated their email. So we're going to create a new value in state called has validated, and then we're going to render that H3 based on the value of that piece of state. So let's go ahead and add that piece of state right up here. And again, it's going to be a Boolean, and we're going to set it to false at the beginning because the user hasn't validated the email yet, right? And then after we've clicked the button, sent the API request, the responses come back, we've validated it, then we will set has validated to true so we can show that message. So putting all that together, now we can come in, the user can input their email address, they click sign up, we ask the API says, yep, that's a valid email. But if they come in and they try to put in a fake email address and they click sign up, then that one is not going to fly with us. Thanks so much for checking out this tutorial. I hope this was clear and interesting. Go ahead and check out the Mailboxlayer API. It is a super easy API to use, and it is really important to be validating your users' email addresses anytime they input data into your site. It's going to prevent fake and spam accounts from being made and just keep your data a lot more consistent and accurate. That's all for now. Bye.